Imagine you're a sailor on an Umayyad warship. You're part of the mightiest fleet ever assembled. You sail into the straits, confident of victory. Then, from the smaller, faster Byzantine ships, a bronze tube swivels toward you. With a roar, a stream of liquid fire erupts. Flying across the water, it hits your wooden ship, and the world turns to hell. The liquid sticks to everything, wood sails. Menand ignites instantly. Panic. You try to douse it with water, but the fire only burns hotter. Some of your crewmates, screaming and on fire, leap into the sea, only to find that the flames burn there too, floating on the surface, an inescapable inferno. This was the horror of Greek fire. History isn't a straight line, it's more like a chaotic river, twisting and turning on the whims of battles, ideas, and single moments where everything hangs in the balance. We often focus on the big epics, the rise and fall of Rome, Alexander's conquests, the clash of modern superpowers. But sometimes, the entire course of civilization pivots on the fate of one city in 1 year of impossible defiance. This is one of those stories. It's about a dying empire, a seemingly invincible conqueror, and a battle that, had it gone the other way, would have utterly remade our world. This is the story of a David versus Goliath moment that has been largely forgotten. Yet its outcome echoes through our very existence. It is the story of faith and fire. In the moment a tiny Christian empire stood against the world's largest army, an army poised to storm the gates of Europe and extinguish its flame forever. In the year 717, an apocalyptic force gathered. An army that chroniclers claimed was well over 100,000 men, and a fleet of nearly 2,000 ships, a force of staggering size for the 8th century, closed in on a single, glittering prize, Constantinople. Their masters, the Umayyad Caliphate, were the undisputed titans of the age, an empire stretching from the shores of Spain to the frontiers of Central Asia, and they had a prophecy on their side. A caliph with the name of a prophet would capture the Christian capital. The current caliph's name, Suleiman. It seemed like destiny was already written. The city was on its knees, ravaged by decades of civil war and decay. Its defenders were a shadow of their former glory, a tiny garrison against a boundless horde. The fall of Constantinople wasn't a question of if, but when. And with it, the gateway to an undefended Europe would be thrown wide open. The continent was just a fractured mosaic of fledgling kingdoms. Completely unprepared for the storm about to break on its eastern shore, what could possibly stand in their way? As it turns out, the answer was a devout backcountry general, walls built for giants, and a terrifying secret weapon that literally burned on water. To get the sheer scale of this moment, you have to understand the world of the early 8th century. On one side, you have the Umayyad Caliphate. This wasn't just some regional power, it was a force of nature. Less than a century after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, the armies of Islam had exploded out of Arabia with a speed that seemed almost supernatural. They'd shattered the old Persian Empire, seized the Byzantine Empire's richest lands in Egypt and Syria, and swept across North Africa. At this very moment, their banners were pushing into Spain in the west and deep into Asia in the east. They were an empire at the absolute peak of its power, wealthy, organized, and driven by a potent mix of imperial ambition and religious zeal. Conquering Constantinople was the ultimate prize, the final move on the board. For decades they had seen the Byzantine Empire, which they called Rum, as the great rival that had to be dismantled. And the Byzantine Empire, it was the direct, unbroken continuation of the Roman Empire, but it was a pale reflection of its former self. Picture a giant, ancient oak, hollowed out from the inside. For 20 years leading up to 717, the empire had been torn apart by a period of brutal instability known as the 20 Years' Anarchy. Emperors rose and were violently overthrown in a dizzying, bloody cycle. The state was bankrupt, its armies were in disarray, and its provinces were either in open rebellion or falling one by one. While the Umayyads were having a golden age, the Byzantines were just trying to survive. And this wasn't just another raid. The Umayyad Caliph Suleiman committed the full might of his empire to this. Years of preparation went into it. A massive fleet was built, and the empire's best troops gathered in northern Syria. Suleiman himself, though too ill to lead, supervised the preparations, entrusting command to his brother, Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, one of the most famous generals of the age. The caliph swore an oath to not stop fighting against Constantinople before having exhausted the country of the Arabs, or to have taken the city. This was meant to be the final, decisive blow. From their perspective, history was on their side. They were the rising power, the agents of destiny. Byzantium was the failing state, a relic ready for the dustbin of history. The stage was set. At the heart of every great conflict are the leaders whose choices shape the outcome. This was no different. The fate of millions rested on two men. One, a prince of the world's most powerful empire. The other, a provincial soldier who clawed his way to a crumbling throne. Leading the Arab host was Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, a name that commanded respect and fear. He was the brother of the Caliph, a prince of the Umayyad dynasty, and a veteran commander who'd spent his career fighting the Byzantines. Maslama wasn't just royalty. He was a battle-hardened and utterly determined general, and he was confident, well-supplied, and at the head of a force that had known little but victory. His opponent, a man from a completely different world. His name was Conan, but history would know him as Leo III, the Isaurian. He wasn't born to royalty. He was born to a family of Syrian shepherds. He rose not through bloodlines, but through sheer grit. He joined the army and worked his way up the ranks, proving himself a gifted soldier and diplomat. By the time the invasion began, he was the military governor, of one of the empire's most powerful military districts. And here's where the story takes a cunning turn. As Maslama's massive army advanced in 716, the Byzantine Empire was, true to form, in the middle of a civil war. Leo had risen up against the weak emperor Theodosius III. Maslama and the Arabs saw this as a golden opportunity. They actually made a deal with Leo, thinking the ambitious general would become their puppet and help them take the city. But Leo was playing a much deeper game. He used their support to march on Constantinople, not as their pawn, but as its savior. He entered the city on March 25, 717, and was crowned Emperor Leo III. He had been emperor for less than 5 months, when Maslama's army, led by the very man he had just double-crossed, arrived at the gates. So you have this incredible contrast. On one side, Maslama, the imperial prince, leading a meticulously prepared force. On the other, Leo, the upstart soldier emperor who had just seized control of a failed state in a military coup. His very first task was to face down the largest invasion force the empire had ever seen. It was a showdown between the ultimate insider and the ultimate outsider, with the future of Europe on the line. Before the first invader ever set foot on European soil, the battle was already being waged against the city's greatest line of defense, its reputation, and the colossal walls that gave that reputation form. Constantinople wasn't just any city, it was the queen of cities, the heart of Christian civilization, the new Rome, for the people inside. Its defense wasn't just a military matter, it was a sacred duty. And at the heart of this defense were the Theodosian walls. To call them walls is a serious understatement. They were, without exaggeration, the most sophisticated defensive system in the ancient or medieval world. They were a triple-layered nightmare for any attacker. First, you'd have to cross a wide, deep moat, about 60 feet across. If you survived the archers and managed to cross it, you'd face the outer wall, nearly 30 feet high and dotted with towers. But getting over that wall was practically a death sentence. Because if you made it, you found yourself trapped on an open terrace, a 60-foot wide killing ground. There, you'd be completely exposed, facing the main event, the massive inner wall. This behemoth was 16 feet thick, stood 40 feet high, and was punctuated by 96 towers, each soaring to nearly 65 feet. These towers were platforms for catapults and other artillery that could rain down death on anyone trapped below. The entire system was an engineering marvel designed to turn any assault into a suicide mission. But Leo III knew that even the greatest walls are useless without a plan. He worked with frantic energy to prepare. He had the walls repaired and strengthened. He amassed huge stockpiles of food. And then he made a brutal but necessary decision. Any civilian who could unsecure a 3-year supply of food was ordered to leave. This cut down the number of mouths to feed, ensuring that defenders could hold out. When Maslam's army arrived in the summer of 717, they weren't facing a panicked city. They were facing a fortress, humming with the quiet confidence of its stone guardians and the fierce will of its new emperor. The Theodosian walls could hold back an army on land, but Constantinople was a city of the sea. To truly conquer it, you had to control the water and strangle it into submission. Maslama knew this. That's why he brought a fleet of some 1,800 ships. But the Byzantines had a secret, an ace up their sleeve so terrifying it was spoken of in hushed, awestruck tones. They called it sea fire. We know it as Greek fire. Imagine you're a sailor on an Umayyad warship. You're part of the mightiest fleet ever assembled. You sail into the straits, confident of victory. Then, from the smaller, faster Byzantine ships, a bronze tube swivels toward you. With a roar, a stream of liquid fire erupts. Flying across the water, it hits your wooden ship, and the world turns to hell. The liquid sticks to everything, wood sails. Menand ignites instantly. Panic. You try to douse it with water, but the fire only burns hotter. Some of your crewmates, screaming and on fire, leap into the sea, only to find that the flames burn there too, floating on the surface, an inescapable inferno. This was the horror of Greek fire. It was the napalm of the medieval world. A weapon so devastating it could turn the tide of a battle in minutes. Its precise formula was a state secret of the highest order, and to this day, we still don't know exactly what was in it. We know it was petroleum-based, likely with pine resin, sulfur, and other fun ingredients. Some even think it included compounds that let it ignite on contact with water. This wasn't just a weapon. It was psychological warfare. It was unnatural, terrifying, and seemed to defy the laws of nature. It was a symbol of a civilization that could literally command the elements. As Mazama's grand fleet prepared to complete the blockade, Leal and his sailors were preparing their siphons, waiting for the right moment to unleash hell. In the late summer of 717, the hammer fell. Mazama's army marched up to the Theodosian walls, a breathtaking sea of men and siege engines. They built a massive siege wall of their own, trapping the city between their camp and the sea. The land blockade was complete. Constantinople was an island in a sea of enemies. Mazama was so confident he allegedly rejected Leo's offer of tribute, declaring he would not rest until he had taken the city. All that was left was to seal the naval blockade. On September 1st, the Arab fleet made its move, sailing to block the Golden Horn harbor. It was the moment Leo had been waiting for. On his signal, the great chain protecting the harbor was lowered, and the Byzantine fleet surged out. They were smaller and outnumbered, but they carried their secret. The Byzantine ships, fast and nimble, closed with the larger Arab warships. Then, the siphons roared to life. Torrents of Greek fire streamed across the water, engulfing the lead Arab ships. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Arab fleet, which had likely never seen the weapon used on this scale, was thrown into chaos. Ships burned to the waterline. Terrified sailors leaped overboard into the burning sea. Within hours, a huge portion of the Arab fleet was destroyed or in full retreat. The naval blockade was broken before it even properly began. This was a massive strategic and psychological blow. It also meant the sea lanes remained open. Constantinople could still be resupplied. Mazama's grand plan to starve the city had failed on day one. Now his massive army was stuck on land, facing the impassive stone of the walls, with a long, hard winter on the horizon. The failure of the naval blockade turned the siege into a grim war of attrition. As autumn faded, Mazama faced anew. For the defenders in Constantinople, it was tough, but they were prepared. Thanks to Leo's foresight, the granaries were full. They had shelter, supplies, and their morale was high, bolstered by their miraculous victory at sea. They saw their survival as a sign of God's favor. For the Arab army, however, the winter was an absolute catastrophe. They were thousands of miles from home in a climate utterly alien to them. Their supply lines, already stretched thin, collapsed. The once mighty army began to starve. Soldiers reportedly ate their camels, horses, and donkeys. When those ran out, they turned to eating bark roots, and even their own dead. Disease followed hunger. Scurvy, dysentery, and the cold ripped through the camp, killing thousands. The unstoppable army was reduced to a huddled, freezing, starving mass, trapped between the walls they couldn't breach and a frozen wasteland. Their magnificent camp had become a graveyard. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Inside the walls, a city holding on. Outside, an army, literally freezing and starving to death. This brutal winter didn't just kill soldiers. It shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Umayyad army. They had come as conquerors. Now they were just trying to survive. Back home, the Caliph Suleiman had died, and the new Caliph Umar II was getting grim reports. The grand expedition was turning into a disaster of epic proportions. As spring of 718 arrived, the Arabs were desperate. Relief finally came. 2 new fleets sent from Egypt and North Africa with fresh troops and supplies. For Maslama, it must have felt like a turning point. But Leo wasn't just a defensive genius, he was a master of diplomacy and intelligence. Many of the crewmen on these new Arab fleets were Coptic Christians from Egypt, forced into service. Seeing a chance for freedom, many of them deserted, bringing Leo vital intelligence on the fleet's positions and intentions. Armed with this knowledge, Leo launched another devastating strike. His fleet, again wielding Greek fire, fell upon the unsuspecting supply ships. With the Christian crews defecting, the entire reinforcement fleet was destroyed or captured. At the same time, a Byzantine army ambushed and destroyed the Arab relief force that had come overland. The Arabs' last hope was gone. But Leo had one more card to play. Before the siege even began, he'd used his diplomatic skill and a lot of gold to forge an alliance with a formidable power to the north, the Bulgars. The Bulgar ruler, Constantinople, was a shrewd leader. He knew that if Constantinople fell, his kingdom was next. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Just as the Arabs were reeling from the loss of their reinforcements, the Bulgar army swept down from the north and attacked them from behind. Suddenly, Maslama wasn't the besieger anymore. He was the one being besieged, caught in a deadly trap between the walls of Constantinople and the relentless Bulgar horsemen. The Bulgar assault was brutal. In one major clash, chroniclers say they slaughtered as many as 22,000 Arab soldiers. The great army that had come to conquer the world was now trapped, starving, and being systematically destroyed from both the front and the rear. By the summer of 718, the situation for Maslama's army was an apocalypse. The Grand Army was shattered. The sea was a hostile barrier. Their reinforcements were at the bottom of the map. Their land forces were trapped between the walls and the Bulgars. Famine was rampant. Morale had completely collapsed. The prophecy of conquest now seemed like a bitter joke. The new Caliph Umayyad II finally sent the order Maslama must have been both dreading and praying for: retreat. On August 15, 718, exactly 1 year after the siege began, the remnants of the army abandoned their camp and began their desperate flight. For the Byzantines, the date was deeply symbolic. It was the feast of the Dormition of the Theotokos, the Mother of God. They credited their salvation to divine intervention, a belief that would resonate for centuries. But the ordeal wasn't over for the Arabs. The retreat was as disastrous as the siege. As the army fled back through Anatolia, they were harassed by Byzantine forces and massacred by the Bulgars. The retreat by sea was even worse. The battered fleet was caught in a series of violent storms. Then, in a final, bizarre blow, ash from a volcanic eruption on Santorini reportedly set some of the remaining ships ablaze. Of the colossal force that had set out with such confidence, the losses were almost unbelievable. Some sources claim that of the 1,800 ships and over 100,000 men, only 5 ships and a few thousand soldiers made it back to Syria. While historians debate the exact numbers, the scale of the defeat is undeniable. It was one of the most lopsided military disasters of the era. Arab legends would later try to reframe the event, but these were stories designed to mask the raw trauma of a crushing, humiliating defeat. The world we live in was shaped by knife-edge moments just like this one. The siege of Constantinople is a testament to how strategy, technology, and sheer will can overcome impossible odds. These are the turning points that prove history is anything but predictable. If you want to explore more of these pivotal moments that created our world, from forgotten battles to unsung heroes, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And let us know in the comments, what other David versus Goliath stories from history do you think deserve the spotlight? The end of the siege on August 15, 718 was more than just the end of a battle. It redrew the map of the future. The failure to take Constantinople was a blow from which the Umayyad Caliphate's prestige never fully recovered. The grand strategic goal of conquering Europe from the east was abandoned forever. The defeat was a major factor that contributed to the internal instability that would eventually lead to the Umayyad dynasty's downfall. For the Byzantine Empire, it was a resurrection. The victory marked the end of the 20 years' anarchy and began a new era of stability under Leo III. Having survived its darkest hour, the empire was preserved as a Christian bulwark, a shield that protected us still develop in Europe for another 7 centuries. The victory at Constantinople, often put on par with the more famous Battle of Tours in 732, stopped the tide of expansion into southeastern Europe. This gave the peoples of the Balkans and Eastern Europe the crucial time they needed to develop their own distinct cultures and identities. The defense of Constantinople was a victory forged from many elements: engineering, technology, brilliant leadership, and cunning diplomacy. But woven through it all was the powerful, intangible thread of faith. For the defenders, this was a holy war, and their resilience was fueled by the conviction that they were on the right side of history. The story of 717 to 718 is the ultimate testament that history is made not only by the powerful, but by the defiant. It was a victory not just of stone and fire, but of the belief that even in the darkest hour, a single flame can hold back the night.